Whenever you rent or buy a video, you need to be sure that the film you choose is suitable for the audience at home.
Do sit down. We're just about to have some tea.
Ladies and gentlemen, please do not panic, but scream. Scream for your lives.
Hail weirdos, the kettle's boiled. Welcome to Tea for Terror, where we take a favourite horror film and dissect it over a nice cuppa. I'm your host, Andrew Graves, and my guest today is here to tell us you can't change the channel, man, future or past. Welcome, Tim Dry.
Well, hello to you.
How's it been going?
Oh, I've got a double album of Tick and Tock music coming out very shortly. This guy, Dave Turner, who released my Retroject albums, wanted to re-release the last Tick and Tock album I made. And I thought, you know what, let's make it a 2-disc set and I'll do some remixes and edits on 9 of the tracks. And so I was caught up doing that. And it's amazing the amount of concentration you need with music, because you hear one thing and you think, okay, I'll change that. And the next day you think, oh, no, that's not right. I've got to change that again now. And it just goes on like that for about 2 weeks, you know. But I've done all the artwork and it's being mastered as we speak. So that should be out for sale by the end of the month, I think.
All right, so can we pre-order it?
I think what Dave does, he sells it through eBay and Discogs.
Okay.
But until I get the final info, I can't really say whether you could. If you're friends with Dave Turner on Facebook, you could ask him.
So has he got a title?
The Dream Orphans.
The what? Sorry.
Dream Orphans.
Oh right. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, there it is.
Yeah. I mean, I originally made the album back in 2005. Christ, that was 20 years ago now. But I was just going through all the fonts in my MacBook, and I saw the title Dream Orphans. I thought, that is brilliant. A great title for an album. Got it. Thank you very much. Whoever. It's not a book. It's not a very exciting font, actually, but great title.
Yeah. Everything's 20 years ago now, isn't it? That's what it is. It's at least 20 years ago.
I just can't get my head around it. You know, you think, oh, that's probably, 5 years ago? No, 20 years. Gone like that.
I know. Well, you know, I do that class because I do a little bit of teaching at a university in Nottingham and teach film stuff. But yeah, so every year it's kind of you were born in what year? that can't be right.
Yeah, I know.
That was yesterday.
I mean, the funny thing is, all my friends are the same age, and we spend a huge amount of time talking about our various ailments. You know, oh, you've got that. Well, I've got this. You know, oh, but I've got that. But also, it's like, you know, I've had this conversation many times with people. It's like, it's not just oldies who feel that time is speeding up. I think young people notice it too. It's something to do with the speed of communication we've got these days. You know, I sent you a message 10 minutes ago. Why haven't you replied? Bastard.
Yeah. Well, also, you know, I think we've touched on this before, but I think it's and this isn't me, you know, whenever you were born in that, and that's the world you have to kind of live with and try and understand. And it's becoming increasingly more difficult, I think, it's as technology increases. And I think but there is I think technology is kind of moving probably to, you know, there are kind of studies and things to suggest that technology in the last 3 years maybe has moved quicker in the last 3 years than it has in the last 50 years, you know, before that. And it's so, but at the same time, I would argue, and again, this is an arguable point, and I know we can point to two examples that go against this, but culturally, we've regressed or we've slowed down. There's I don't know where else to go, because if you know, if you just aesthetically, if you look at aesthetically,
Yeah.
things, all cars look the same. Most people dress very similarly. It's the, yeah, because we don't, and I think this is part, arguably the last proper actual decade of discernible difference was the 1990s. And I think I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying that now you don't really get decades. It's more of it's all kind of merges into one another in this technological mass.
Yeah. I mean, I was born in 1952, so for the first 2 years of my life, we still had rationing, so that ended in 1954, I think. So my childhood was, bomb sites and, the discovery of a secret armament tunnel in Red Hill, very exciting things. So my childhood was the normal thing of fish fingers, baked beans, and no television for a while. Then Dad got this huge walnut sort of fascia cabinet with a screen the size of a paper bag on it. And the picture was appalling. We had 2 channels, and he'd get up from his chair, leaving his double whiskey there, and hit the bloody thing, fuck it. And, we had all this, because I was very ill as a child. I had pneumonia and bronchitis and all this bollocks. I used to read a lot, because I didn't have a TV in my bedroom. That's beyond my possible wildest dreams. And so that gave me a grounding in fantasy and fiction and another world outside of my bedroom, And I think the difference between I don't know what generation we call, are we boomers or whatever? Anyway, the kids now have grown up with all of this stuff. So there's nothing to explore anymore. It's all there. You've got the internet, you've got your iPhones or your whatevers. We had to search out stuff. And I think that made exploration very much more prevalent for us.
I think obviously, there is still pockets of cultural resistance. I'm not saying that that's disappeared. I think there's underground stuff, and I think there are still some brilliant filmmakers around. And I think some of the best films I've seen have actually been released in the 21st century. So I'm not saying everything's dead, but I think particularly aesthetically, if you look at a photograph from 1971 and then look at a photograph from 1981, there's a massive shift. Whereas if you took a photograph 10 years ago now compared to now, I don't think the phones might be slightly bigger. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, it's, if you think about 1982, which was my sort of major year for doing Star Wars and Xtro and all this stuff, and making music, releasing a single, that was 41 years ago. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. But if you take 41 years away from 1982, where were we then? It's like World War II, everything else. It was, it's all very strange. But, for me, music sort of stopped around the beginning of the 90s, I think. And the music I listen to is mainly what we call retro music, It all got very strange after the whole new romantic thing, which I was a minor part of. It then moved into house music and acid house and all of that stuff. And then it all got very anodyne, I mean, pop music, what little I hear, it all sounds exactly the same. I know this is what my dad used to say, Oh, rock and roll is all the same. Well, actually, Dad is not really. But anyway, I've become a grumpy old man, and it's really quite disturbing.
Okay, so before we get into the film we're going to look at, I think you could. I would imagine at the time, and even now, I think the film we're going to look at later on, it's possible that it would get lumped in with like slasher films, because of the same, because the 80s were kind of full of slasher film, and I would argue it's something greater than that, and it's something stranger than that, and I think there's a lot more going on. But I think on the surface, you can imagine this on the video shelves. This would have been alongside a lot of those slasher films. but I think slasher films are in themselves a kind of subgenre of what we might call the kind of serial killer films, and this is definitely falls
Yeah.
into that category. But I'm just wondering whether um, there are any particular sort of serial killer films that you thought of worked, not necessarily serial killer films that are based on
Mm,
reality, but could be just a fiction, but
mm,
because for instance, I mean, I think probably the bleakest and probably the most effective kind of serial killer film for me
mm.
is 10 Rillington Place,
Oh,
because it's so
yeah. Mundane.
unendingly mundane, bleak, damp,
Mm.
dank,
Yeah.
horrible.
But again, it's that post-war England of austerity, grimness. You know, we won the war, but we're more fucked than Germany. You know, it's terrible. And because I live in the outskirts of Notting Hill, the thought of Christie sort of working as a cinema projectionist in Lancaster Road, um, and just you wouldn't look at him twice if you saw him in the street. You know, yeah, okay, we're getting to the whole thing about the mundanity of um, movies about serial killers. Uh, Another one that does a lot for me is Peeping Tom
Yeah,
by
yeah, yeah,
Michael
yeah.
Powell. But if you go further back, then you got Frenzy by Hitchcock, which is about a serial killer. And that, I think that was probably my first exposure to the concept of a serial killer. Up until then, you had murderers, you know, because I was so young. And when did Christie get nicked? It was in the 50s, so I would have still been a small kid. I didn't have any access to that information, so all of this info came in a lot later. That there were usually guys, maybe the Moors murderers. Anyway, but you know that all came a lot later. Peter Sutcliffe and the rest of them. But then, of course, I became quite obsessed with Jack the Ripper, the original serial killer, if you like. I just saw an interesting video on YouTube by this American guy. He's very gothy, and he reckons he's actually definitely found the grave of Jack the Ripper, and it was a Polish Jew called Aaron Cemetery in North London. And Catherine Eddowes, I think, was the last victim. No, not second to last victim. And by her body was a blooded shawl. And one of the investigators took the shawl home because he liked the pattern on it and gave it to his wife, who thought, oh, I can make a nice, scarf out of that. And it was only in later years when the shawl was passed down that they did a DNA test on it and discovered that the blood and the semen on it matched that of this Aaron Kosminski character. I'm going off topic, aren't I, really?
No, it's fine. I mean, I kind of went through when I was a lot younger. I kind of went through my Jack the Ripper phase, and it's because it is kind of like it is fascinating. But I think as I've got older, I think it just becomes a thing where who he was is absolutely fucking irrelevant. And I think the best book I've ever read about the Whitechapel murders was The Five, which was absolutely completely ignoring the killer, and it was about those five women, and it really goes into some depth. And one of the biggest revelations is because so many people have just accepted it without question, and the author goes really does a massive deep dive into these these poor women that were killed before their time. And it is, but the thing that's been accepted is that they were all sex workers. That's just not true. It isn't true. And they all had these kind of varied, interesting, weird, kind of just lives that have been seldom been explored. And I can't recommend that book enough. The Five.
Okay.
It's
I'm just going to make a note of
absolutely
that.
brilliant.
Yeah, another one that was pretty resonating was Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Yeah.
I think that was the first time I saw the mundanity of someone who has to commit those sort of crimes. Because there's, in some perverse way, there's something kind of glamorous about Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer, which the media has made into almost they're kind of like cult heroes in some awful way. And when you see the movie we're going to talk about very shortly, you realize that it could be the guy next door. It's the Christie thing, isn't it? You know, you see the bald-headed guy walking past with glasses on and a raincoat. You think, all right, so what? And it's that depth of depravity, but also the fact that they can mask it so well, you know.
And I think, yeah, when we get into the film, I think that I was going to say best then, but that's not the right word. But the most interesting kind of takes on the serial killer, particularly in cinema, is that they will pick up on and explore this ability of the killer to groom and manipulate. And I think that this film that we're going to look at does that brilliantly. Yeah. The main character is so adept at grooming people. It's terrifying. And I think, you know, you get a little bit that with Norman Bates. Certainly you get that with you know, Attenborough's portrayal of Christie in 10 Millington Place. And because that, you know, and this is the thing, it's like mad men, they don't know that they're mad. What they're saying and what they're doing makes perfect sense. So when you get like a film, when this happens in a lot of bad horror, is that you get a villain and it's they know that, you know, they're kind of over the top, and that's not the case. They might be. So characters might be kind of, what they're doing is atrocious, but they don't see it like that. It's you know, so that when you get a good performance is when you get somebody who plays that like what they're doing makes perfect sense, because that is truly chilling.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that is chilling about this particular movie that we're going to talk about is the kind of domestic side of this person.
Yeah,
he's very loving, he's very attentive. On the other side, he's doing bad things, but it's the fact that love can sort of blind you, but also it's one of the first movies where you actually get some kind of backstory, and that takes place about an hour into it, you know, where you suddenly realize that the guy is completely fucking nuts.
So the film we're going to look at today is White of the Eye from 1987, directed by the late, great Donald Cammell. So before we dig deep into it, can you remember the first time you saw it, Tim?
Crikey. Well, obviously my introduction to Donald Cammell came with Performance, which I saw for the first time in 1977. And I still think it's the most extraordinary movie ever, as we talked about a few months back. So I was aware of Donald Cammell as this strange entity because Nick Rogue suddenly went on to do Walkabout and Man Who Fell to Earth, blah, blah, blah. But Donald Cammell, he sort of dropped off the radar until, I think it's 10 years later, he did Demon Seed. And I was really intrigued by this character who was a very well-respected painter. And I discovered more and more about Donald Cammell, that he lived in Paris and he was very much into a menage a trois. with one of the actresses who was in performance, and he gave up painting, but he was really talented, you know, sort of Scottish Royal Academy and all that stuff, to make films, but he only made 4 movies. And so I became very interested in what he was going to do next. So Demon Seed I really liked. Well, I mean, I can see various flaws in it. And then this movie appeared, and that's like 20 years after he did co-directed Performance, you know. So I went to see it, and I just thought, bloody hell. I mean, it has certain resonances with Performance. You know, his use of cutting. It's not the same editor who did Performance. That's Frank. What's his name? Italian surname. Anyway, but it has that sort of jump cut kind of dislocation going on. And I just thought, wow, this is unlike any other movie I've seen about somebody who is a serial killer. But the way it's presented is so artful. You know, you're sort of, for the first hour, you're watching a movie that is beautifully shot in this barren wasteland of Arizona. And again, it's the mundanity of this guy. He's a good-looking stud, but, you know, and he services bored, rich housewives and does the bad thing. But it's just, one of the things that intrigued me was that the lead actor, David Keith, is not A-list. He's not conventionally handsome. He's not Alec Baldwin or whoever, you know. And that gave the movie, for me, a grim reality, you know, because he is the sort of guy that you've got in to fix your fuse box. You know, he's got tight jeans on, bit of a bulge going on, you know, chicks love it. Jack the Lad, you know, charming, and he loves strange music, opera music. And he's driving along in his van and he's singing along to this extraordinary piece of operatic music. And I just thought, this is so odd. You know, this is not like any serial killer I've ever seen before. Brilliant. Because you've got a sort of backstory going on as well, you know.
Well, I mean, I was going to talk about the casting. Now, when I say this, I'm not trying to be rude at all, because I think the main 3 characters. So you got Mike, you got Joan, and you got Paul, and I think and so Paul's David Keith, Joan's Kathy Moriarty, and Mike DeSantos is played by Alex Rosenberg, and I think they're all really good. However, there is also, when I was watching it, I was thinking, David Keith is kind of, he's not quite Patrick Swayze. And Joan is, Kathy Moriarty is not quite Meryl Streep. And Alex is like kind of not quite Mickey Rourke. It's almost like they went for the...
I'll tell you something. I watched the movie again last night for research. And interestingly, 2 things in the opening credits. Opening credits come up. Alan Rosenberg gets the top billing, and all the others, you know, Chena Kong and everyone else. The 2 leads don't have a credit in the opening credits. They're not there. That's a bit odd, I thought to myself. And then it says music by Nick Mason and Rick.
It's a guy from 10cc, and then obviously Nick Mason from Pink Floyd.
And then when you look at the credits on IMDb, they're not mentioned at all. It's George Fenton who did all the music. And I thought, well, that's strange. Why would you not have the credits for the 2 main leads in the opening credits? Odd. But the use of music in this movie, again, it ties back to the use of music in Performance, which I think is one of the best soundtracks of any movie ever. You get this sort of lonesome kind of slide guitar country kind of vibe going on. But then you also get this sort of electronic thing, which, like the death of Turner in Performance, you know, it's like a sort of repeated sort of droney kind of sound that comes in and out of this movie. And it doesn't fit, but it does. It's so, everything about this movie is dislocated. Anyway, sorry, I do ramble.
No, I think you're right, and I think that the one of the I think dislocated is a good word. And I think one of the reasons is that a little bit like Nicholas Roeg's Walkabout. Now,
Yeah,
with Walkabout, you've got a British guy going to Australia to make this beautiful, brilliant, terrifying film as
mm,
part of the Australian New Wave. So it is absolutely a British film, but it's also absolutely an Australian film.
yeah,
Because because the one of the things with the Australian New Wave was it wasn't you'd had a lot of films in the sort of 50s and 60s where British or American directors were going over and they're simply just using Australia as a backdrop, but they
sure.
didn't really feel like Australian films.
Uh,
Whereas Rogue understood that. But I think the opening sort of 5-10 minutes of this film
mm,
reminded me of the beginning of Walkabout because
mhm,
because there is this what Rogue does really well with Walkabout is
mm,
he lines up this idea of modernity and technology and civilization, and he squares it up against nature and the desert.
yeah,
I think that this is almost similar in that you've got, again, Cammell as the British guy going
yeah, yeah,
to this desert, the sort of desert landscape, and you
mm,
get hints of that right at the beginning. You've got this kind of yuppie-ish kind of woman who's the first victim, and she's
mm,
got all these modern accoutrements and all this kind of stuff. But at the same, but in every kind of shot, you can see the desert on the horizon, and it's almost
yeah,
like you can't escape that. It's gonna encroach on you, and this viciousness or this savagery is gonna encroach. It
yeah,
doesn't matter how much money you chuck at it or how much concrete you lay down, it's there. And it
mm.
really struck me that had a lot in common with Rogue's Walkabout.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because the two of them worked on performance. So
Yeah,
one, Dick went that way, Donna went that way, and they took obviously bits from each other. And interesting, your correlation between Walkabout and this film. Um, but one thing I thought about yesterday watching it again was that most serial killer movies take place in big cities. You know, um, and these people sort of move freely amongst thousands of people. But this it's like you're stuck on a desert island.
yeah,
You got all these bored. You never know what these bored women's husbands do, if in fact they do still have one. But they're stuck in these ghastly modern high-tech homes in the middle of the fucking desert. And so, bulging crotched, Paul turns up to install a hi-fi. What are you going to do? You're going to fuck him. But there's some scenes in this movie that are even more disturbing than scenes in Peeping Tom, for example. There's one scene that really suddenly struck home last night when he trusses up this woman in her kind of eiderdown, a pink eiderdown, and he wraps her around with wire, so she looks like some giant sausage,
yeah,
and he chucks her in the bath and he pushes her under the water with his foot. That's pretty intense. But he then takes a hand mirror and holds it over her face
yeah,
and she's dying. And I just thought, oh, well, that's Peeping Tom again, isn't it?
yeah. It's very people, but also it's that extra level of cruelty.
Yeah. He didn't need.
He kind of he knocks her out. He trusses her up in the towel and all this kind of stuff, and then
Yeah.
he he kind of makes sure that she's fully conscious and she
Mm.
understands this before he kills her. Yeah,
The other thing about this, sorry, the other
yeah,
thing about this movie is you never see any slashing or blood splatters or, all the usual cliches of a horror movie or a serial killer movie. Hack, hack, hack. You don't see anything. And that opening shot of one of the first murder, you see his eye, and then it's presumed he's hacking her up. And you just see this goldfish gasping
yeah,
for breath on the table. It's like, that is fucking brilliant. Because I don't need to see fountains of fake blood spewing all over the screen. what you don't see is so much more powerful. And that's very clever of Donald to do that, you know, to not resort. I mean, yeah, the thing about slasher movies, I don't really like them. I just find them predictable. And it's, I'm actually doing a horror con in middle of England in July. And Eileen Daly, Martine Bezic, Caroline Munro, you know, various horror ladies are doing it as well. But it's that kind of genre of horror that I don't really get off on. You know, I enjoy Hammer stuff on a camp level. But for me, the real horror is not supernatural. It's what real people do, you know. And I think this movie, again, we come back to the mundanity of it, you know, because he loves his wife, you know, and she slowly starts to put together something is not right with him. Is he playing away from home? Yeah, but he's doing a lot more than that. I've got a quote up on my screen here. It's when she finally confronts him with what is in the bathroom. And she goes, Paul, I found something in the bathroom. Paul, oh yeah, what? Behind the tub in there. Oh, that. Yeah, I was going to talk to you about that. I hid it in there, you know. I didn't want Danielle getting into a lot of chemicals and stuff. You can't hide anything in this house, can you? It's like, it's so matter of fact. You know, it's like, oh, he's just talking about, you know, he's dropped the car keys or something. It's, ooh.
Yeah, it's really chilling, and it's a really great performance by David Keith, I think, as Paul, because it's so because there's nothing until you get the reveal of him being absolutely barking at the end. It's so, you know, he's almost kind of almost to the point of being dull. You know, he's good looking, but he's, you know, he's not, you know, he's very nerdy character, and it's like it's almost like nothing about him until you start to get the real hints that this is the guy. But as I said earlier, he grooms the whole town. You know, he's got a mate who's on the force, who's absolutely convinced that he could not have done this. You know, the black cop guy, the detective, is almost apologetic that he has to arrest him. You know, and that's a very Ted Bundy thing. You know, Ted Bundy fooled a lot of people. There are famous quotes of judges saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, we've got to go through this," and there's all this apologetic stuff because he'd fooled so many people and he groomed so many people. And I think Paul does it brilliantly, and it's almost like, you know, one of the earlier scenes when we first see Paul and Kathy and their relationship, and he's doing that thing where he's, you know, he's kind of saying, using his voice to figure out where the speaker should be, and it's almost like, you know, Cammell is saying, you know, he's so in tune literally with this environment and this community that they can't possibly believe that he could be doing this, and that's what makes it really odd.
It's I understand that completely. It's like, well, we're such a small community, really. How could he, you know, he fitted a hi-fi in my home. How could he possibly? That's ridiculous, you know. I fucked him, sure, but, you know, it's again, it's the use of music in it. Also reminds me of a lot of The Man Who Fell to Earth. You know, a lot of that sort of expanse of. That was in New Mexico, you know, the whole thing. And there's shots in The Man Who Fell to Earth where Newton is talking to Bryce, and Newton says, well, all things begin and end in eternity. And his hair's blowing over his face. And you just got this huge expanse of nothingness, you know. And for an English suburban boy, all of that is terribly exciting because I've never experienced anything like that. The only time I have was when I did a commercial in the Jordanian desert for Trebor Extra Strong Mints. And it was the first time ever I've been totally surrounded by nothingness. It just goes on forever. It's like fucking hell. But normally I'm a town boy, so I don't know. It's an underrated movie, I think, because it isn't a glamorous, Hannibal Lecter type, or who slashes people up with no real backstory. It's so real and so grim and so mundane again that it didn't do well at the box office. It didn't. It just tanked, really.
Yeah.
Which is a shame. But maybe, it can be reevaluated or something. I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah. So I was going to jump back a little bit. So obviously this is a Donald Cammell film, and he directed it, and it was co-written by himself and his then wife, China.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned that he only went on to actually direct a handful of films over a quite a long period of time, and I think that is because he was, a true artist in its truest sense, in that he was completely unable or unwilling to compromise. And I think that from what I understand, the film he was working on when he actually died, because of the compromises they wanted him to make, I'm not saying it was entirely this, but they directly contributed to him taking his own life.
Is this Wild Side?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that not that I'm at all suggesting that obviously he killed himself and that was an absolute tragedy, and no one should be faced with that sort of those kind of demons, but I do think, so putting that aside, I think that in terms of this unrelenting inability or unwillingness to compromise, I think that is something to behold, given that if you, because I mean, these aren't kind of, I mean, I'm not saying they were like top tier Hollywood films, but they weren't like underground features either. They were kind of, and I think there's something, given the nature of kind of more mainstream Hollywood films that are on top of the pile, how absolutely they are absolutely products of complete compromise all the way through, focus groups or fucking 20-year-old producers who don't really know anything, or market values, or this and this and this. They are all absolute, I'm generalizing, but the a lot of those films or your Netflix releases, they are absolute products of compromise. And to have some, and I think that, Nicholas Roeg may have made more films, but he given the longevity of his career before he died, he could have made a lot more. But I think it was that I want to make this film. I want to do this, and
I think that Nick Roeg's probably his first 6 movies were worthy of his entrance into the Hall of Wonderful Movies. I mean, I think he lost the oil a bit towards the end, but David Lynch, I mean, if you think about his early movies, they're pretty fucking out there, especially Eraserhead. Gosh, I mean, it's like, how did he suddenly become mainstream? What I mean, we are talking 30 years ago, I guess. Now things are very different now. Everyone wants to make something that's going to stream on Netflix, or it's not the same. When people actually had to physically craft a film with real film and projectors and screens and stuff, takes dedication and a lot of hard work and a fair amount of money. It's like everyone wants the safe bet these days, really. Now I look at what's on offer on Prime or Netflix, and I just think, it's the same with fucking Jason Statham again. Bless him. I mean, it's just like everyone wants to be safe with everyone else. This is what we were talking about earlier. It's the sort of conformity of people these days must make it very difficult for unique filmmakers to even get in the door. But then you have Guillermo del Toro, who's got a new movie coming out, which is his version of Frankenstein. And he says it's not a horror movie; it's a love story. Wow, could be good. But so there are sort of what do you call them? Mavericks out there still.
Yeah. And like I said, some
Or
my
the young one.
Horror is kind of my bag, but I'll watch any sort of films. But I think the if the 21st century has done one thing right, it's that it's able to there have been some of the most interesting, fascinating horror films in the 21st century, and and I'm not again, the stuff that kind of floats to the top, the more commercial stuff, I'm not necessarily your Halloween, God knows whatever it is now, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your films like Ari Aster's Midsummer, or more recently Talk to Me, or the new version of Nosferatu, or Skinamarink, and all these are just really fascinating, interesting, really well done films. And I think again, I think that horror, in its broadest sense, I think it that horror is able to tap into the zeitgeist in a way that more mundane or mainstream drama can't. Because you can wrap it. You can offer two different levels. So for instance, another 21st century horror film, Get Out, is incredibly intelligent, and it obviously has a lot to say in terms of race and all this social commentary. However, if you strip away that message, it still works as a really effective horror science fiction film. It's brilliant. And I think this is where horror has it. If you've got a straight-laced drama and you're just doing it on this topic, but the drama is not actually that good, then who cares about the topic? Whereas horror, if you can dress it up in these kind of over-the-top rags, or a serial killer or a psychopath, or all this kind of stuff, and you can sneak in these messages. So I do think that there are some really interesting, brilliant directors of horror and other sort of genres as well in the 21st century. So I don't think it's completely dead. However, I think a lot of the mainstream stuff, it's kind of flailing about, and if you try and make a film for everybody, it ends up appealing to nobody.
Yeah, well, it's just like it's franchise time, isn't it? It's like, how many, as you said earlier, how many versions of Halloween do we need? Or Nightmare on Elm Street or whatever. It's just like, that's when, for me, it all went tits up. I just thought, this is boring now. I mean, the first Nightmare on Elm Street and the first Halloween were great. They were really on top, and then it's just like, oh, another one. Oh, Texas Chainsaw, that first one was really good. Under the Skin was a good movie. I really enjoyed that. Scarlett Johansson. That's like another approach into what we have to call horror. I mean, if you ask the average man in the street, what's your definition of a horror movie? He's going to say Dracula, or Nightmare on Elm Street, or maybe Silence of the Lambs, or whatever. But I've always said that I'm not a big horror fan in that respect. I don't want to watch yet another sociopath with a mask on hacking teenagers to bits or whatever. I'm done with Dracula. I'm done with werewolves. Certainly done with zombies. I've never got onto zombie movies at all. I just find them silly. Apart from Shaun of the Dead.
I think you. Would you not? You wouldn't watch something like Romero's Night of the Living Dead, or Dawn of the Dead, or Day of the Dead?
I have seen those, yes, but they were a long time ago, and they were originators of that. But you can go right back to the Vincent Price black and white movie, was remade. How many times was it remade? The last version of that movie was with Will Smith.
Yeah. It's The Last Man on Earth, and it's
Yeah.
based on I Am Legend. Yeah.
That's right. See, that was cool. I mean, but I find horror movies for me are not involving the supernatural, which is why I steered away from doing stuff, quite obvious stuff on this particular channel of yours. It's like everybody's going to do something that does have vampires or werewolves or,
You know what? I mean, I have to say and this is how good the guests are on Tea for Terror. They've not really done the obvious thing, and I think the people I've approached, they're all seriously into horror in one form or another, and they take it really seriously, and they are kind of desperate not to do the obvious stuff. And I think that's really refreshing about it. And I think what if it's just a fucking stupid fucking YouTube channel, but if it's proved anything, it's that horror it's a really broad church. And I will argue that films we've I said this before, but I have had, talking of like slasher films, one of my guests from a while ago was Ari Lehman, who he was the first Jason in and he's a lovely guy, and he wanted to do this, and the film he chose was Olivier's Hamlet, and it's just like where did that come from? But it is a horror film. I will argue with anybody that is a horror film. It's got all of those. It's a ghost film. It's creepy. It's gothic. It's a horror film. It is.
Oh, you can add Macbeth in there as well.
Yeah. Well, Polanski's version of Macbeth. That is kind of like,
that's the one for me.
Hammer horror meets Shakespeare. It's
fucking
brilliant. Yeah.
Again, John Finch, bless him. The late John Finch.
Frenzy. Yeah.
And playing Jerry Cornelius in the final program. That was a movie that I loved. That stank without trace. But I love Michael Moorcock's writing, and anyway. But I mean, horror is a broad church, but unfortunately, people tend to focus on the sort of bloodier aspect of it, whereas I'm more interested in the kind of psychological aspects of what is truly horrific. I mean, I had this little thing with Barbie the other week. She said, "Well, why did you choose performance for Andrew's show?" I said, "Well, that's pretty horrific." He goes, "No, it's not a horror movie." I said, "No, but think about it. When Chaz gets beaten up by his ex-lover, gang members, and when Chaz shoots Turner in the head, that's pretty horrific." So, and you said, "Yeah, let's do it." So in some ways, I wouldn't say performance is a horror movie, but it has some terrifyingly horrible moments in it. The whole idea of transforming someone into what you used to be is horrific. And I think
in the same, it's very Faustian. It's very sort of, it's demonic, and it's got all of those. It's got kind of hints at supernatural sort of stuff as well. It's
more chemically induced or organically induced hallucinations of whatever. But I guess you have seen the Donald Cammell documentary, The Ultimate Performance, which is about his whole career and life.
Yes, a long time ago. But I have seen.
I mean, he was obsessed with Aleister Crowley and Kenneth Anger, and I think he actually played a small role in one of Anger's movies. So there's always been that sort of occult undercurrent in Donald's movies. Well, certainly Performance and White of the Eye. But there's a couple of things in White of the Eye that haven't been explained. The symbolism of certain objects placed at compass points on a table, that recurs twice, and there's no explanation for it. It doesn't mean anything, or does it? That's Mr. Enigma strikes again. It happens twice, and the last one is when his daughter is sort of hiding in wherever she, under the table, I think, and he's getting ready to do the big one, and he places the 4 objects on the table, so it's north, south, east, and west. It's like, is that just a little sort of tease that Donald chucked in there? Fuck it, let's put that in there. But I love I didn't realize until yesterday watching it again that it's actually based on a novel.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I thought, when I first saw it, it said written by Donald Cammell and Gina Tong. I thought, oh, great. It's actually based on something else. But, this is where Donald shot himself in the foot, or later shot himself in the head, because it's the most uncommercial movie at that time that no one wanted to watch it. The same as Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer. I mean, did people go and see that? I mean, I did.
It became. I wouldn't say it was a massive box office hit, but it got this cult following, and I think a lot of it. I mean, I certainly didn't see it at the cinema. I saw it the first time on sort of VHS. So I think it was almost like a 90s kind of video nasty that kind of its reputation grew from sort of video sort of days, really. But I can't rewatch that. It's a nasty film.
It is
really nasty.
It is, but it's. I mean, this is a nasty movie. There's no redeeming feature about it. I mean, it does go completely over the top toward the end. It's just like, oh, come on.
But I was just gonna, because I think when we get to his, where he goes completely off the rails at the end. I mean, I like that, and I like the fact that we hinted at, so this idea of him being obsessed with Apaches, and I was looking into this, and it is kind of still shrouded in mystery. People aren't entirely sure, but apparently the name, different theories about the name Apaches, and some people have said it kind of harks back to, it can be translated as the enemy, or it can also be translated as, another theory is that it can be translated as people. So it's almost like whether Cammell was aware of that, and it's kind of like planting those two ideas together, because he's so good at grooming this community. So he is both part of the people and the enemy. I don't know. But then obviously there is this hunter fascination as well, him being the hunter, and also
there's that grotesque scene toward the end.
Yeah, and his outburst about black holes, and obviously this seriously misogynist kind of anti-feminist kind of this.
Yeah, I mean, he'd said basically that the black hole is a woman sucking everything in. But the movie does have one of my favorite lines of all time. It's where God, Joni is just a middleman. I just think that says everything, doesn't it? That he's possessed by something way beyond any religion. And it's the other guy, it's Mike, who's obsessed with being an Apache. He says it quite early on in the movie that we
never really, because he's Mike DeSantis, but we're never really entirely sure. He's never really entirely sure of his background, because he's in the few scenes. I mean, I really, really, really like that character, and I think it's a great performance, and I love that idea that he's almost had some sort, he tells us he's a very unreliable sort of person in terms of, we're never quite sure of his background. He says he's been to prison and he got pushed down the steps. We're never quite sure what that is.
He's a bit of a shyster.
And he, the first time we kind of had those flashback scenes with him and Paul can see that he's an absolute bullshitter. You can see straight away. But I really like that character. But in the end, he literally gets sucked into Paul's madness and ends up literally exploding.
Yeah, but it's nice that we kind of forgotten about him most of the second half of the movie. It's like, is the X, But his appearance at the very end in that quarry, and he's got the blanket on. It's like, oh, why are you wearing an Apache blanket? And he's got the shotgun or whatever it is he's got. he suddenly saves the day, But visually, I mean, the moment that Paul dons the belt of hot dogs, as his daughter calls it, and the gun belt, and he's done the half face down. That's fucking weird. The half face red thing. But also that flashes back to when he and Mike are hunting, and he rips this fucking poor animal to bits, and he smears the blood over the bottom half of his face. It's like is that an Apache kind of ritual, or is it whatever? You see, it's a movie. I love movies that have different levels that you can go away and think, oh, hang on, what? Performance does that in spades. It's like, it's not just about, gangster on the run sort of thing. I don't know. It's like I have endured Wildside, which was butchered by whoever edited it, and it's a boring movie. It's just Christopher Walken with a kind of Richard III haircut, just going nuts for an hour and a half. It's like, nah. And the wonderful thing about Donald's suicide is that he does it in the same way that Chaz shoots Turner in Performance, and he's still lucid and able to move around for 45 minutes. I mean, fucking hell. That's not slashing your wrist in the bathtub. It makes you wonder what possibly Donald could have gone on to do well, I don't know. You see, it's best that he just did what he did, really, because it would be awful if, Donald Cammell directs the new Star Wars movie. No, fuck off. No, that wouldn't happen. But I did get to know David Cammell, his brother, and he never really told me a lot about Donald, but he was always destined to burn out rather than fading away, and so Demon Seed, I was going to suggest that for a watch for us, but you opted for this one. I mean, that's quite horrific, but it's sort of a bit silly as well.
Yeah, I don't think I like Demon Seed. I don't think it's as good as this film.
No, it's not. It's on a different level.
Yeah,
I think. Would you call it a horror movie?
Would I call this a horror film?
Oh no, this not this. Sorry, Demon Seed. Would you? Is that horror?
Yeah, I think it's kind of horror, science fiction. Yeah, but I think it works as a horror film, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, with this, I think it is. I mean, if you go back to the scene we were just talking about, where we have so we obviously he's obviously wearing the make. We get that reveal, and he's got the makeup, the war paint on the bottom half of his face, this red.
Yeah.
And then we cut back to it's a flashback with Mike, and they're out hunting, as you said, and they butcher this. Well, he's already killed the deer, and he then starts to take it to pieces and rips the antlers out, and then bites a chunk out of it. So he's got this red blood around his face, which obviously is a callback or whatever. But then later on, where he gets a cut on the head, and so the blood's and it's not, it's absolutely deliberately done, because the blood only runs, it's like almost perfectly symmetrical. He's got no blood and then blood, and it's kind of like but it's almost like the human face he had that's fooled this town for so long is gradually disappearing until there's only this tiny bit left. It's really clever, and I think there's just lots and the fact that in the flashback hunting scene, he's got this blood around his mouth, and then he proceeds to give Mike a massive smacker on the lips.
That was a real shock.
And it's just Mike's face. It's like, no wonder he's fucked up. No wonder he's got out of there as quickly as possible. Who the fuck is this guy?
But also you've got this sort of three-way relationship between Mike and what's her name, Joni.
Joni, yeah.
You know, that ends as soon as she clocks Paul in the, you know, whatever it is, and they embark on this. So that's going to fuck Mike off. But then he disappears from the story until later on, as we know. But the one thing is, like, I've always thought, why does he collect the body parts underneath the bathtub? Why are they there hanging? And it's only in the last sort of moments when he's preparing again with the 4 symbols on the table, and he's placing this sort of polythene bags of body parts in symmetry on this table. And he says to his daughter something like, "Oh, we're going to have a real feast tonight." And you think, whoa, now are we talking about cannibalism here or what? What does he want to do with those? It's, you know, it's an enigma within an enigma, the whole movie, which is what appeals to me. It's not straightforward. It's not Silence of the Lambs, you know, it's not Seven, although I love both movies, but there's ambiguities in this that you are left to question things. And I find that quite attractive. You know?
Well, just the whole complicated relationship he has both with Joni, but also with Danielle, his daughter. You know, Danielle, as we're led to believe for most of the film, she is absolutely the apple of his eye. You know, and even when the madness is revealed and Joni's trying to get her friend to come and pick up Daniel, and then they get the phone call with the friend saying, "Yeah, I can come and pick her up," and then he's incensed because he's saying, "What? How dare you think I could possibly hurt my daughter?" And then literally, like, you know, 10 minutes later, he's shooting at her from a window, and it's like,
he kills the dog.
Yeah, and it's like, what? How? Just doesn't it? I mean, some people could say, "Oh, that's an incongruity of the writing," but I don't think it is. I think it's just like he has no idea how fucking insane he is.
Yeah, because he's not in control of it.
No.
As he says, it's not God. It's like he was chosen. He was the bombardier. And she goes, "What do you mean, the bombardier?" And he goes, "Well, Hiroshima. You know, the guy didn't choose to be the guy who dropped the bomb on the Japanese city and killed hundreds of thousands of people." But one thing that does bug me is that the daughter's running away, the dog gets shot. She's in the pickup, whatever it is, driving away. Why doesn't she pick up the daughter?
I know, yeah.
Where's the daughter gone?
Yes. Yeah, I did notice that. So I thought, well, wouldn't you want to go find your daughter straight away instead of driving off in the opposite direction?
But no, she heads to the quarry. I quite like the way that just before the whole shitstorm goes off, she dives into the water to avoid whatever's going. I mean, I thought that there's a sort of air shot of the explosion, and the camera pans back and you see the whole quarry, this plume of smoke and stuff. I thought, great, end there, please. Oh, no, she's in the diner with the black cop, and it's like, I'm going to Malibu or whatever, you know, spinning the coin, you know, and it's just like, spoils it for me. That was a bit too
I
real.
didn't mind that, to be honest. I didn't mind, because I think it's kind of a heart back to this kind of 10 years thing, and, you know, and he's talking about that she was in love with him. And even, you know, even when he's on the shore, you know, he's in the quarry, and he's clearly, you know, he's absolutely, you know, he's nearly killed their daughter. He would kill her in a second, and she still can't relent, you know, I still love you, you know.
But when Mike shoots him in the legs, and he's lying there in agony and stuff, and she's going, "Oh my God, he's going to bleed to death." Even after all of the shit, she still wants to save him. It's, you know, it's an emotional. See, it's about a relationship as much as it is about a mad serial killer. I mean, apparently, in the synopsis, she decided to drive from New York, hence the kind of slight, you know, Brooklyn accent, down to Malibu, but they get stuck in Arizona. I don't know. It's just, I've never really spoken to. I know Barbie hates it, the movie, and she also hates Peeping Tom as well. But she's a strange little
Well,
creature.
she hates the Wicker Man as well. It's like,
Oh God, don't get started on that.
Yes.
I keep saying every time we have this conversation after a few drinks, it's like, yeah, but come on, it's a great. No, but Christopher Lee in a wig and a dress. It's like, oh God, that's not the point. But I don't know this. It's so Barbie, female Cenobite finds this movie, Peeping Tom and The Wicker Man, distasteful. It's brilliant. I love it a bit. It's just so strange. I don't have a great problem with The Wicker Man. My only problem is Edward Woodward. I just don't like him as an actor, never have done. But I think the whole premise, it's for me, Midsummer was almost like a sort of remake of The Wicker Man. I found the horror of The Wicker Man is that need to sacrifice a human being in order to make your crops grow. That's horrific. I haven't watched the new Nosferatu yet. I rented it the other day and I thought, I've got to be in the right mood for it. I've read so many, conflicting comments about it. I don't know. I should. It's going to run out in a few days, isn't it? But it's like does he bring something new to the table with it? You've seen it, right?
Yeah. No, we talked about it on this show. It's what he bring. I mean, it looks great. But this is a very. He didn't try and just replicate what, the 1922 version. It was just something aesthetically it's good, but it taps into a lot of stuff, modern themes and so you could argue that there's stuff in there about Ukraine or that kind of this idea of male toxic masculinity and the idea or the stuff we've seen in America where people are trying to men are trying to retain control over women's bodies. All of this kind of stuff is touched upon, but it's wrapped within this gothic horror story, and it really works. I think it's great.
Okay. Well, I will check it out.
So any last words to say about White of the
Eye? I'd say check it out if you can rent it or whatever, and discover a movie that has lots of different layers. It's not your average serial killer slasher thing. It's more complex than that. And it's an intelligent movie. It's not a cheap cash-in. It's not going to be to everyone's taste. I know that. But if you can, give it a shot. You never know. You might like it.
Yeah, I would kind of second that. I think it's one of those films that you don't really see coming because it does fly under the radar for most people, but it's a really good example. It's a good Donald Cammell film, but it's just like the main character. It's just slightly incongruous because it's people could probably see it as an American slasher film, but it's not that because it's a British film that happens to be filmed in Arizona or whatever, but it's about a serial killer, but it's more than that. It's absolutely not just a run of the mill slasher at all.
There's no actual slashing in it.
No, and it's probably got more in common with something like Manhunter by Michael Mann. It kind of make a good double bill with that film, I think.
Yeah, well, the ultimate double bill would be this and Peeping Tom. That will really fuck you. But it's also the other thing about it is sound. I mean, this guy is obsessed with finding the right sound for the right room. So he's actually a very gifted guy in his own field. He just happens to have a sort of sideline,
Well, yeah, well,
Mm,
it just remains for me to say thank you again to my guest, Tim. It's good to
my pleasure.
finally get you back on again after some bumps in the road and all that stuff.
Mm,
But it's been lovely to talk about this,
thank
this
you.
underrated um, American thriller, well, British stroke American thriller.
Yeah.
So yeah, so hopefully we'll get you back on again at some point.
Hmm.
But yeah, so remember to call round next time. Make yourself at home. You look like you're dying for a nice cup of tea for terror.